Senator McCallum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable Senators, I rise today to enter debate at third reading of Bill C-62 regarding the delay in expanding MAiD to include mental illness as a sole criteria. I am concerned about the expansion to mental illness as a sole criteria and have had conversations about assisted dying with many doctors, organizations, and First Nations, including many who are former students of residential school. At their request, the perspective that I will share with you is from former residential school students. I will speak our truth from our hearts with sincerity. Colleagues, through research and documented history, it has become widely known as truth that sustained contact with Europeans fundamentally altered the lives of First Nations. Documentation exists that representatives from the churches and government would change the bodies, minds, and spirituality of First Nations, intimating that those changes would make First Nations better able to deal with the supposed civilized world. In the book Colonizing Bodies by Mary Ellen McCallum, she states that medical portrayals consistently presented First Nations as essentially pathetic, pathological, and powerless. She states that infectious diseases continued to affect Aboriginal people well into the 20th century, not because they were genetically ill-equipped to fight disease, but because of decisions made by the governments in British Columbia and Canada. In her book, the author states, "In examining the shaping of Aboriginal bodies and minds through the processes of colonization, this study argues that Aboriginal ill health was created not just by faceless pathogens, but by the colonial policies and practices of the Canadian government." Mary Ellen McCallum argues that the body and mind are a social construction because they are unfinished, always under construction by the forces of society, culture, and legislation, including to this present day, that Aboriginal bodies and minds are made. Honorable Senators, I agree with this characterization because I realize that the person I thought I was after I left residential school has been a farce and a lie. I am 71 today, and I'm still dealing with the effects of that social experiment on my life, with its deleterious effects extending to my community, immediate family, extended family, including my grandchildren. It has been a life's journey to go back to that little girl who entered residential school at the age of 5, and she was a success story, and who came out as a lost soul. I try and understand that story and the ongoing impacts it has had on my own mental health while trying not to be too hard on myself. Colleagues, at a residential school gathering held in Vancouver 2 weeks ago, an intergenerational woman said, "We are learning to find our place in our own country and on this earth, to understand who we are and that our parents, residential school students, weren't bad people." Another expressed that he couldn't understand why his father was the way he was. Many shared that they never got to hear their parents' story. One person told me, "Now I know why he did what he did." Essentially parenting the way we were raised at residential school, as that cold, callous, and punitive treatment was the only way we knew, as it was the only modeling we had been exposed to. Yet, why do we as First Nations continue to allow ourselves to think that we're the problem when we're not? I speak of these experiences, Honorable Senators, because it is an important foundation on which to anchor and situate the mental health crises and illnesses that are running rampant in First Nations communities right across this country. Being in residential school is a story that few of us have shared with our children because it's taken us a lifetime to start to understand the horrendous situation that we were placed in. We were denied our own history, our strong sense of Cree, Dene, Anishinaabe identities removed, to be replaced by a racial journey into personhood, literally the recreation of colonial bodies. We still have a lot of hard questions to ask ourselves in our country. What makes you think it's your responsibility to tell us how to heal ourselves or to help kill us as a solution to the mental illness this country injected into our people and our communities? The unfinished colonialism today is indeed always under construction and undermines First Nations efforts towards our healing. We have not dealt with the sexual abuse that occurred in these buildings. Many former students continue to deal with this silently. They have nightmares on a daily basis. Sexual abuse is the hardest abuse to deal with. These are difficult conversations, colleagues, but they cannot be hidden. Imagine yourself as a child who is sexually abused, then informed by these same abuser priests and nuns that you are a sinner and a savage, and God doesn't like bad children like you. What would you be like today, and how would your mental condition be? Imagine then having to go to confession as an innocent child to confess sins to your abusers. Imagine that you are looking out the window one night and you see the priest carry a little body into the bush and come out empty-handed. Imagine that you don't know when it will be your turn to face that abuse again and whether the next time that abuse will ultimately lead or may not lead to your death. Now imagine carrying that weight of this trauma with you your entire life. And people chastise us for living on the streets, for not able to trust anyone, for drinking, doing drugs to chase away memories and shame. We blame ourselves for then bringing sexual abuse and other forms of violence back into our communities, with a resultant increasing number of suicides every year. With underfunded and ad hoc resources that are checked with a fine-tooth comb by colonial minds, others actually tell us how we should heal. Colleagues, for the reasons I named above, First Nations are facing a mental health epidemic that far outstrips the Canadian public. I know this, and you know this. We need to be offered the chance to heal and to live our lives unencumbered by burden that the government and church placed on us. Instead, Canada has now informed the former students of residential school that the words residential school will not be used anymore, but that the wording trauma-informed will be used, erasing the unique trauma that residential school resulted in. In a letter dated January 31st, 2024, from representatives in Indigenous Services Canada, the letter states, "Dear agreement holder, as you may know, the current funding for the trauma-informed health and cultural support programs is currently set to end on March 31st, 2024. We understand the uncertainty this may cause when future planning around staffing and service delivery. While a budget 2024 announcement is still pending, in order to assist you in your organizational planning beyond April 1st, 2024, the department will be extending the current funding for the trauma-informed health and cultural support program until June 30th, 2024. Honorable Senators, First Nations and residential school students, Honorable Senators, what we need is permanent funding for residential school healing supports, which will be required beyond our lifetime, as intergenerational trauma is just that, intergenerational. This approach needs to be acknowledged and supported by government as arduously as answers and policies around medically assisted death. Honorable Senators, in a media release, Prime Minister Trudeau accepted the conclusion of the 2019 inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women that, quote, what happened amounts to genocide. He said, to truly heal these wounds, we must first acknowledge the truth, not only about residential schools, but about so many injustices, both past and present, that Indigenous peoples face. In the same article, Guelph University political science professor David MacDonald states, the Canadian government would be admitting that the genocide occurred by the hands of institutions that still function more or less now as they did before. The earlier version of their parties, the earlier versions of their parliament, the earlier versions of the RCMP, the earlier versions of the Department of Indian Affairs committed genocide. The attitudes have changed, and all the personnel are different, but there's institutional continuity in Canada, which doesn't happen in Germany. As First Nations, we have ever-evolving new challenges that add to the mental burden we already carry, including the denialism of unmarked graves, individual and collective identity theft and fraud, unresolved land claims, and citizenship issues. First Nations have the burden of knowing that our numbers are decreasing by the government's discriminatory rules around membership. My grandson applied for status, and he was denied it. He cannot self-identify because of their rules. Yet, the government simultaneously accepts an extraordinary number of Canadians claiming unverified Métis status. Our scholars call this the last bounty. Identity theft and fraud of our bodies, ownership of our history, our residential school experience, our intellectual property, and now our languages, I see. How will Canada look like in the future? You will have white and not so brown bodies running around claiming to be Indigenous, while what few of us status remain by the wayside. Canada's original peoples have survived an intentional, sustained, well-financed and executed program of genocide perpetrated by the Government of Canada for centuries. However, we are tired and we need help. But the help we need from the government is not the extended hand of death. No. What we need is the proper support and resources so that we can rebuild our nation based on our traditional values. We will continue to assert and defend our sovereignty every single day, knowing it will help the generations yet to come. I support this bill, and I hope you do too. It'll give us time, much needed time. Kinanas kumitnawa. Thank you.